Hi, this is Jonas from Haler, and today I'm going to talk about data modeling in Haler. We just published an article on this topic, which can be found in our help portal on help.haler.com. I'm not going to go over the article in detail in this video. Instead, I'm going to show in practice how to do the same things described in this article. Usually, when starting to modeling processes and data in Haler, a good idea is to draw a diagram or sketch of what we're trying to do. So in this case, I'm going to use Draw.io, which is a simple and easy to use drawing tool, which is free to use. And I'm going to use a simple CRM and sales order workflow as an example. So first of all, we need a place to store our customer details. So I'm going to call that customers. And that is in practice in Haler, typically either a data set or workflow, depending on what your preferences are. But now in this case, I'm just gonna make a data set which is called customers. And then if we want to keep track of persons that um, are somehow relevant or linked to a particular customer, we can create a data set called contact persons, which then is linked to the customers like this. In addition to this, we need to track what we're actually selling to our customers. And for that, I'm going to make something called sales orders. And then we need something that we sell, which we in this case call products. And then we need a way to connect these two. So this will be called sales order rows. And as you can see while I'm drawing this diagram, there's actually a kind of hierarchy that is being developed at the same time. So uh, this is often the case. So the customers are at the top. Then we have the contact persons and sales orders pointing at the customers. And then we have the sales order rows pointing at both the sales orders and products. So yeah, now we have our structure in place. And now it's time to model this in Haler. And what I usually recommend is that we start out with just creating data sets with only one category and just focusing on the actual links, which in Haler means adding activity links first. So now I'm in the activities view in Haler, and as the activities page is empty, I am prompted with this selector or dialog where I can choose either ready-made templates or create custom ones. Now I'm going to create custom ones like this, and let's call this customers. And I'm going to make this a data set for now, which means I'm not going to focus yet on the phases in the customers for now. Okay, then I'm going to create another data set, which is called contact persons, like that. Then the sales orders, then the products, and then the sales order rows. All right, so now it's time to connect these. And if we look back at the picture, we can see that the contact persons should be pointing at the customers. So that means in the contact persons data set, we need to add an activity link field, which points at the customer. So customer, we name it customer, and then we allow an activity link to customers like this. Then we want the sales orders to point at the customers as well. So we configure that as well. And then we want the sales orders to point at both, sorry, we want the sales order rows to point both at the sales order and the product, like this. So now we have a structure in place which is similar to the one we just envisioned in Draw.io. So I'm gonna rearrange these a little bit and you will see that it's similar to the picture we just made. So this is the actual structure now in our workspace, and this is the picture we envisioned, or the structure we envisioned earlier. So it's the same thing. And the tool I'm using for getting an overview of the actual workspace is the bird's eye view, which can be accessed from the activities page in the top right corner. So this first tab draws the actual relations between the different data sets and workflows. It also produces documentation of functions and also the actual structure of the workspace or the actual fields in the workspace. All right, then I'm going to continue configuring the workspace when we have the structure in place. And it's usually a good idea to do the structure first and then focus on the actual fields that we want to insert in the model. And then as a last thing, think about the actual process and what happens in which phase. So I'm going to do some uh, quick configuration of each data set. Uh, it's usually not a good idea to have discussions enabled in data sets that simply are designed to store data and not act as a kind of main activity for something. So I'm just gonna disable the discussions and also the file attachments, since it's usually not needed in this kind of data set. All right, then what do we need in a sales order row? Well, we need a field that displays the amount of products being sold. So I'm gonna add a numeric field and call that amount. And we might as well make these required now, because a sales order row without a sales order or a product or amount is not useful. So let's make these required. Also, what we need to do is add a numeric unit field, which displays the unit price of the selected product. Now I'm going to use euro as the currency. Then we also need a field that displays the total price. So both of these will be function fields. I will get back to these a bit later. Okay, we could add units still. We can have it as a predefined options field, and let's add some different units like kilo, pieces, and I don't know, some volume like that. Okay, this will be a function field as well. We'll get back to these. All right, then let's look at the products dataset. Again, I'm going to disable the discussions and the file attachments, and let's add the relevant fields for a product. And now, as we just configured the sales order rows, we at least need the same fields here. So unit price is definitely needed. Then we need the unit, and we can add the same units here. So kilo, pieces, and volume, like this. And let's make these required as well. Yes, I think this is enough. And then let's move on to the sales orders. So in a sales order, we need a field that represents total price of the order. This will be a function field. Again, I'm disabling the discussions and file attachments for now. Mm. I will not add any more fields in here right now. This will do. And then let's move on to the contact persons. So obviously every contact person needs a customer, and then yeah, let's just add a description here. Obviously you could add more, like phone number, for example. Let's keep that in a separate field, but I won't make this required for now. Again, disabling these for now. And then the customers. And here I'm going to keep the discussions enabled and just add a text area for now with description. So usually it's a good idea to add some activities to actually test the current structure and data model to see that it actually works. So let's start with the customer. I will just create an example like this, and then let's create a contact persons. Select the customer, add the phone number like that. Okay, I apparently added the wrong field type as description for contact person, so let's change that. Okay, this is a predefined options field. That was not the intention. I will delete that and add a text area instead. All right, now it's added. Keep in mind that if you delete fields, the data will be deleted as well. All right, now we have a customer and a contact person. So next up, let's add a sales order. And the first thing we see when adding the sales order is that it requires a title, which is usually not a good idea because sales orders come and go, and salespersons or whoever making these shouldn't be forced to enter separate names for sales orders. So we need to build a function. So I will go into the settings of the sales orders and to the fields tab, and then in the name field settings, I will activate the function field. And now I need to start with setting a new dependency, which is the name of the customer here. And I will rename the dependency, not use capital letters, so just name like this with small letters. And then I will pick the data object of the sales order as well, because that includes a sequence number that is quite handy for naming things. So now let's come up with some kind of simple naming scheme for sales orders. So let's just return, this is JavaScript. So let's just return the name of the customer, and then to this we just add something to separate a name, and then add SO, and then the data object and the sequence number from there. And now if we can't run the function yet because there's no activity in place that we could use for making an example run. So I will just save the function and add a new sales order. Let's see how this goes now. All right, so now, yeah, Now the function looks like this. There's no error handling in place. So obviously, because the customer is not yet selected and the activity is not yet created, there's no sequence number. So what we can do to improve this is to add some kind of error handling, like just add an empty string like this. And then if there's no, well, actually we could do it with the same syntax here. So if there's no name yet, we just fall back to select a customer like this and add parentheses and make this a bit more readable. So this should work. Let's try again. So yeah, now this looks a bit nicer. So now let's select the customer, and as you can see, this is immediately updated. And then obviously the total price is not something you're supposed to fill in manually. It will be calculated with a function, but we need to put some activities in place to be able to configure this workspace properly. So I will leave this like this and save. And now we have our first sales order. Now we need to add a product that we can sell. And yeah, let's just call it office desk, and it costs 500 euros, and the unit is pieces. And then we need to add a sales order row that connects the product and the sales order. And again, having to input a name manually for a sales order row is not a good idea. So this needs to be replaced with a function. I will now just name this row row1 because it's easier to write a function when having some data in place. You will see why in a minute. Then let's select the sales order. Let's select the product and just select the amount 5 and save. And now let's activate the functions for the sales order rows as well. So let's go into the settings and start with the unit price. So a good idea when fetching the unit price of a product is to do it with a function, but keeping the function field editable. Because when the product price changes later, we don't want the old rows to be updated again. So that's why it has to be editable. So let's just fetch the unit price of the product like this. And I will rename the dependency. It's not mandatory, but it looks nicer in the code. And then just return dep unit price like this. And that's it. But then I make it editable as well. So it's not updated later on unless the field is emptied or refreshed. And the total price is the amount times the unit price. So I will just return amount times unit price. I need to write dep in front. So this works, but in some cases JavaScript isn't that good at handling numbers, so I usually use a rounding function that looks like this. And what this function does is that it leaves up to 2 decimals in the value if needed. So I will just put round in front of this function, and it's rounded whenever needed. And that's it. I will save this. Okay, and then we have one more, or actually two more functions to write. one is the unit, and again, this is just returning the unit from the product because we want it to be the same as in the product information. But we can make this editable as well. So if we want to change the unit for a product on a sales order row manually, or we don't want it to be updated automatically later on, it's this making it editable does that. Okay, then we have the naming function to go still. Usually a good way of naming sales order rows is just taking the amount and the product name. So let's take the amount and the product name and just return it. So dep amount plus then just an X and dep name. And we might want to do some kind of fallback here so it looks nicer when the amount or product has not yet been inserted. So having 0 as a fallback in the amount field usually works, and then just for the product, let's write selected product like this. Save. So now we have sales order rows that are named automatically. The unit for some reason is not yet picked out. So let's have a look why it doesn't work. So I picked the wrong dependency. I picked the unit field from this same data set. So I basically made a loop. But we need to fetch the unit from the product information instead. So now it works. And then as the last thing, let's add a function that adds up the total price of all sales order rows connected to the sales order. So I will access the function and select the dependency linked from field sales order rows and total price. And again, as we're adding or summing a lot of values, it's a good idea to have a rounding function like this. And then we have to make a variable that we call total and a loop that adds up all the rows. And I will rename the dependency total price. And then let's add each value to total like that. Yes. All right. So now we have the total price function in place as well. And now you could say we have some kind of basic structure in place. What we could do is add the payment term still, so you get a bit more familiar with handling dates in Hailer, with functions especially. So what we could do, which is quite typical, is to have the payment terms in the customer details. So let's just add a new predefined field here, which is called payment terms. And let's add some typical values like 7 days, 14 days, and 30 days. And we can make it required and default to 14 days. Then let's update the payment terms in the customer to be 14 days. And then in the actual sales orders, we do a similar field, which picks the value from the customer details. So again, payment terms and the same options, 7 days, 14 days, 30 days. But this field, we make a function that picks the payment terms from the customer details like this. And we just return it like this. And we make the function editable. Again, this means it fetches the value from the customer details, but you can edit it later on. And if it changes later on in the customer details, it does not update in the already existing sales orders. So now we have the payment terms in the sales orders. And this means we can calculate the due date if we have a starting point. So as a starting point, let's use today. So let's call this field order date. We make it required and we default to the current date. So this means if there's no date in place, when I edit the sales order, it defaults to today. And I will use that value now. And now we want to calculate the due date. So we have to add a new field, which we call due date. And we make that a function, which has the order date as a dependency. And then we need one more dependency, which is the payment terms. And this you can do in several different ways. This is maybe possibly considered a bit hackish, but we can parse the number of days from the payment terms value. It's a string. So let's just make a new variable we call payment terms. And then we just check if there's a value in payment terms. And if there is, I will make this a bit more readable, adding some brackets. We just parse the integers from that string, or we parse the integers. And if that isn't successful, we just make the payment terms equal to 0. All right, so now we have the payment terms, and now we simply want to return order date, payment terms. And now, since we use Unix timestamps in Hailer, this means we need to manipulate this value a little bit. So in one day, there's 24 hours. In every hour, there's 60 minutes. And every minute, there's 60 seconds. And in every second, there's 1000 milliseconds. And by doing this, we get the correct output. And now I save the changes. Let's have a look. So now 14 days is added to the order date. And now we're happy with the fields we added to the data sets. And now let's use a moment to think about the phases and which data sets we actually want to make into workflows. And in this case, I think the sales orders could be in a workflow, let's say with 3 different phases, like drafts, ordered, and delivered, for example. So let's edit this data set. And first of all, make it a workflow, and then add phases. So drafts, ordered, delivered. And then we have to link these phases together. I would just link all phases to all phases like this. And now we can obviously move this sales order to delivered to keep track of what is actually delivered and what not. And now with the processes, data sets, and functions in place, we can take a new look at the bird's eye view we looked at in the beginning of this session. Obviously, the structure still looks the same, but now the sales order is a green dot instead of a blue one because it's a workflow. But now in the function documentation, we can see all the functions neatly listed that we just wrote. So this is a good way of kind of getting an overview of all the code in your workspace and how it works. And then there's also now a good workflow and dataset documentation with all the fields, the field types, whether they're required or not, what kind of options the predefined options have, what the field IDs are in case you're building some kind of integration, for example, where you want to fetch data from Hailer or use our webhooks to send data to an external service. These field IDs help you interpret the payload. And that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice day.